Chapter 5 of Mag and Margaret, A Story for Girls, by Pansy. Chapter 5 Raisins. The month of January was not yet past when trouble in a new form came to poor Mag Jessup. It began with a bowl of raisins. I suppose if Mag lives to be an old woman she will never forget how she felt on that Saturday toward the last of January, when the sun suddenly seemed to stop shining. She had been unusually happy that morning. Nothing had ever seemed sweeter to her than the little pillow on which she had gone to sleep the night before. A new boarder had come, and on her finger had sparkled a diamond ring. Mag had heard not only Norah but Mrs. Perkins and her daughters talking about it, and Kate Perkins had said that one of the girls at school told her the lady used to be very rich, and had "no end of jewels." Now it so happened that Mag was very fond of jewels. When she walked along the street and met a lady wearing a beautiful pin, she almost had to move slowly, so as to gaze at it as long as possible. Sometimes she dreamed of being very rich, one of her day dreams, I mean, and always among the first things that she bought with her money were beautiful rings, and pins set with jewels. She had gone upstairs that evening with her mind full of the beautiful lady, and the hope that she would be able some day to see her jewelry. Wasn't it strange that when she opened her little pillows the reading for the evening should be "My Jewels"? Of course, after that, she read each word with even unusual care. It was all about God's jewels. She almost held her breath for joy and wonder when she learned what they were. "If you fear the Lord and think upon his name, you are one of his jewels, and all that you are going to read about them is for you," so the book read; and Mag stopped, her eyes shining and her cheeks very red, and hugged the little book closer as she said aloud, "Oh, it does mean me! I think about him and fear him and love him." Then she read on. "God has found and chosen his jewels, and he will never lose them. Every one of them is kept safe in the casket of his everlasting love. He does not mean to hide them away and be ashamed of them. The day is coming when he will make them up, when they will all be gathered together in his treasury, and shine together in his glorious crown, and not one will be forgotten, or overlooked, or lost." After that, Mag could pray as she had not prayed before. She knelt down with a strange sense of value upon her. She was not simply little Mag Jessup with nobody in particular to love her, and nothing to be very glad about. She was one of the Lord's jewels, and he was going to take care of her, and never lose her. All the following morning the thought was strong within her that God loved her very much. That same little pillow she had read the night before closed with a verse of a hymn: "Sought and chosen, cleansed and polished, purchased with transcendent cost, kept in his own royal casket, never, never to be lost." Mag made a little tune for it, and went about her dressing, singing it cheerily. Even in the kitchen she sang it softly, until Norah, who had extra work, and felt hurried and cross, told her to stop her "everlasting humming and tend to her work." There seemed to be extra duties for every one that day. At least Mag had never been kept busier. And the doorbell rang continually, interrupting everything she tried to do. Several times she was scolded for slowness when she might have explained, if anybody had given her a chance, that the bell had rung 7 times since she began to rub the spoons and forks. At last Norah summoned her to the little room off the kitchen, where bread and pies and cakes were always made. This is the way she called her: "Mag Jessup, if you haven't got them spoons done yet, it is time you had. I want this cake stirred. Be quick about it now. I never did see such a slow coach as you are. You don't earn your salt. What Mis' Perkins bothers with you for, instead of getting a smart, capable girl as she ought to do, beats me. Take hold of that cake spoon. Not with that hand, little stupid, the other. And stir it the same way all the time. Mind you don't change at all. It will be as tough as leather if you do. I've got to go and see to my chickens and a dozen other things. Folks in this house always have to do 6 things at once, and I want that cake stirred every minute till I come back." She was gone a long time. The heavy mixture in the large yellow bowl was faithfully stirred by Mag's small brown hand, always the same way, although her hand ached and she realized what a rest it would have been to have made the spoon go the other way. Then she wondered why it was that cake stirred the other way became heavy. She never for a moment doubted the statement, for Norah was a fine cook, and, of course, knew everything about her work. If this were one of her good-natured days, and she occasionally had them, Mag would have resolved to ask for a reason for this strange state of things, but none knew better than she that Norah must be asked no unnecessary questions on this day. Her hand began to ache very hard, and she was wondering nervously what she would do if the doorbell rang. Would it make the cake as tough as leather for her to leave it long enough to answer the bell, when at last Norah appeared again. What was Mag's astonishment over her first sentence. "Well, now, Mag Jessup, I think you've done it. If you don't catch it this time, then my name isn't Norah McGinty. A whole bowlful, and heaping at that, and now there is hardly half of them left. Do you think I have nothing to do but stone raisins for you to steal, you thieving little wretch?" A vigorous shake from Norah's strong arm emphasized this last. Mag, when released, fairly staggered under its force, but she spoke quickly and with unusual energy. "I haven't touched a raisin, Norah. I never thought of such a thing. Why, you know I wouldn't. I've just stirred the cake every minute." "Oh, yes," said Norah, "you've just stirred the cake every minute, of course. And the raisins jumped up and tumbled themselves out of the window, I suppose. That's a likely story, isn't it? Don't you think you see Mrs. Perkins believing it? You're a jewel of a girl, you are. Stuff your mouth full of raisins the minute a body's back is turned, and then had to take stoned ones at that. Little ninny! Why, didn't you know you would be found out?" If she had not used that word "jewel," no one can be sure what poor Mag would have said, for she felt herself growing very angry indeed. But to be called a "jewel of a girl" saved her. Yes, she was a jewel. Norah did not know, nor Mrs. Perkins, nor anybody, but she was the Lord's own jewel, precious in his sight, and he would take care of her. But why, oh, why, did he let Norah suspect her of stealing raisins? She kept her lips tightly closed. It was no use to tell Norah again that she had not touched the fruit, and she must not say anything else. Her very silence seemed to anger Norah. "Do get out of my sight," she said spitefully. "Little whining hypocrite! Been muttering a hymn all the morning. You'll sing out of the other side of your mouth before night, or I'll miss my guess. If Mrs. Perkins doesn't make you sick, I should think the raisins would. How you must have stuffed to get all of them down while I was gone!" Poor Mag waited for no more. She went back to the knives that were not quite finished, but all the brightness had gone out of her heart. There was trouble in store for her. Mrs. Perkins had laid down strict commands against her servants nibbling anything. Especially solemn had her teachings been to Mag in this respect, probably because she was so much younger than the others. The girl had been assured that taking things from her mistress without leave was nothing more or less than stealing, and the lowest, meanest kind of stealing at that. And now to be accused of stealing raisins! If it had been bread, poor Mag thought that she would not have felt so humiliated. Norah had called her a hypocrite. Mag did not know what the word meant. She said it over and over, resolving to look in the big book where Mr. Frederick had told her all words were, the first time she had a chance, and find out. It had something to do with her hymn, it would seem. And thus reminded of the hymn, the forlorn little girl, who did not feel like singing, said over softly, "Kept in his own little casket, never, never to be lost." Ought she to be entirely miserable after all? "What is this I hear of you, Mag?" It was several hours later, and Mag had begun to dust and put in order the upper hall, when Mrs. Perkins's voice, cold and stern, summoned her to judgment. How came you to meddle with Norah's raisins after all that has been said to you about touching other people's things? Is it possible you did not know that you were stealing from me?" All that poor Mag could do was to repeat earnestly that indeed, indeed, she had not touched a raisin, but had stirred the cake every minute. Mrs. Perkins's face grew sterner. "Did you see the bowl of raisins when you first went in the workroom?" she asked. Mag, considering, explained that before she went in there to work, Norah had called her to bring a spoon, and that then she had noticed the raisins, but that when she went back to stir the cake she had not noticed or thought of them at all. "And how full do you think the bowl was when you saw it?" asked Mrs. Perkins. Poor Mag hesitated, and her face flushed painfully. She knew her answer would condemn herself, but the truth must be told. With a faltering tongue she admitted that she noticed that the bowl was very full, and wondered while she stood there if Norah could put on another raisin without making them spill over. Mrs. Perkins looked her keen rebuke. "You see how it is, you wicked child. Your own words prove your guilt. You own that the bowl was full to overflowing, and you know that you were the only person in the room, and that the bowl was only half full when Norah came back. Yet you dare to tell me that you did not touch a raisin. That is simply adding falsehood to the sin of stealing. And that last makes it a great deal worse, because a greedy child might even be tempted to steal raisins, perhaps, but to steal them and then lie about it shows a depth of wickedness that I must say I did not expect in you. Now, what is to be done, do you suppose? My raisins are gone, of course. There is no help for that. But what am I to do about it? Here is a house full of boarders at your mercy. A girl who will help herself in this way to other people's things is never safe to have around. I suppose I must warn them all that we have a thief in the house, and they must lock up their possessions when she appears. That will be very pleasant for us all, won't it?" Poor Mag's already burning face showed a deeper crimson. She believed that nothing more terrible than this could ever happen to her. To be branded all over the house as a thief; to be railed at by Norah and sneered at by the other servants; to have the boarders looking at her and telling one another that they must be careful lest she should steal their things; above all, to have Mr. Frederick told such a tale as that! She felt she could not bear it. Mrs. Perkins looked at the crimson cheeks and downcast eyes, and watched two great tears roll slowly down the small, pale face, and felt really sorry for the culprit. After all, she was a little girl who had never been properly trained in her early childhood, and all children loved sweets. But of course she could not have her pilfering things. It was just as well to frighten her thoroughly. She would let her think for a while that everybody in the house would know of her disgrace. But the slow tears were too much for Mrs. Perkins's heart. After a few minutes of solemn silence she began again. "I'll tell you what I will do. It is the first time you have been caught in such a disgraceful act, and therefore if you will confess to me that you took the raisins, and tell me you are sorry for having told a wicked lie, I will forgive you, and the boarders shall know nothing about it. That will give you a chance to show by your actions that you are truly sorry." Then Mrs. Perkins waited for Mag's grateful thanks. She felt that she was being very kind indeed, kinder possibly than she ought. Her conscience even pricked her a little, because, of course, a child ought to be punished in some way for telling a downright lie. But then Mag's miserable face showed that she was being punished, and it must have been a sudden temptation, for Mrs. Perkins recalled instances which seemed to prove that Mag was generally truthful. For this once she would err on the side of kindness, and forgive her outright as soon as she confessed her sin. But Mag stood silent and downcast, the slow tears still falling one after another on her brown hand. "Well," said Mrs. Perkins, a little sharply again, "have you nothing to say to such kindness? It isn't every one, let me tell you, who would waste so much time on a naughty little girl. Saturday at that, and all kinds of work waiting for me. If you are going to confess what you have done, and say you are sorry, you would better be about it. I shall not wait all day, I promise you." Thus urged, Mag lifted tearful eyes to her mistress's face, and spoke slowly, tremulously. "I thank you very much, ma'am, but I can not confess it, for I did not do it. I never touched a single raisin." Mrs. Perkins made a gesture of impatience. "Stop!" she said. "I don't want to hear any more. You are too much for me, I declare. Quite skillful at lying, it seems, and I confess I did not suspect it. Very well, since you choose to take the consequences, I will decide what to do with you. Meantime, you may go back to the kitchen. Let the upstairs work alone. I will tell Norah to keep you busy, and to keep an eye on you at the same time, to see that you do not steal anything else." Oh, the weariness and misery crowded into that short January day! Nobody could have persuaded Mag that it was a short day. It seemed to her at times that the hour would never come when she could creep away to her attic room and cry. Norah found no difficulty at all in keeping her busy, and, being tried by many things, found it a relief to use her tongue in all sorts of stinging ways on Mag. When the doorbell rang she was directed to see to it that she did not make away with any of the things on the hat rack. When she was sent upstairs with a cup of beef tea for the invalid boarder, she was warned not to make a mistake and drink it herself. In these and 100 other ingenious ways her supposed sin was kept constantly before her. The climax was reached just after tea, when Mr. Frederick Ainsworth returned to the dining room to ask Norah if the evening postman had come yet. "I don't know, I am sure," answered Norah. "Mag says he has, but we can't believe anything she says." Mr. Frederick turned back in amazement, and gazed first at Norah and then at poor Mag, as though he could not have heard aright. It was too much for the poor little girl. She burst into a perfect storm of tears, and ran past him into the kitchen. Chapter 6